like Sophie Cunningham speaks about the reality inside a locker room, people pay attention. She has been through enough battles to understand the difference between normal growing pains and deeper problems. And this season, the pressure, expectations, and constant spotlight surrounding Indiana created an environment unlike anything she had experienced before. The question was no longer just about wins and losses. It was about chemistry, communication, trust, and whether the Fever could turn enormous attention into actual basketball success.
And it's starting to cook. Cunningham 3 is good.
Picture this. Sophie Cunningham sits down with her family and tries to explain what it feels like to share the court with Caitlin Clark. She starts talking. She tries to put the experience into words. But before she can even finish the thought, the emotions take over. The room becomes quiet. Then everyone starts crying. Not because something went wrong. Not because of sadness. Because some moments are bigger than basketball. Tonight, we look at that moment. What Sophie Cunningham actually expressed. Why those words carried so much weight. And what they reveal about Caitlin Clark beyond the statistics, the headlines, and the constant attention. Because to understand why this meant so much, you first have to understand Sophie Cunningham. For someone with her reputation, vulnerability does not come easily. She has built her career on toughness. On playing through contact. On competing when things are uncomfortable. On never backing away from a challenge. That is why this moment stood out. When a player known for her toughness becomes emotional while describing another athlete, people naturally want to know why. The answer begins long before the Indiana Fever. It begins in Columbia, Missouri. That is where Sophie Cunningham's basketball story started. In her family, basketball was not just a game. It was the language everyone understood. It was the conversations at home. The hours spent practicing. The lessons about discipline, competition, and commitment. The sport shaped who she became. And after years of fighting her way through every level of basketball, Cunningham found herself sharing the floor with one of the most influential players the sport has ever seen. Caitlin Clark. For Cunningham, the experience was not simply about playing alongside a superstar. It was about witnessing something rare. A player whose impact could be felt by teammates, opponents, and fans all at once. And that is what made her reaction so powerful.
Columbia, Missouri, so I wouldn't be mad, but also need to, go to work. And my mom was running track at the time, and so there's a family connection.
Basketball was never just a sport in the Cunningham household. It was part of the family identity. Her father, Rex Cunningham, played professional basketball overseas in Europe. Her mother was an athlete as well. Her brothers and sisters competed at high levels. For Sophie, the gym was never a place she had to discover. It was home. It was where she learned competition. Where she learned discipline. Where she learned that talent only takes you so far, and the players who survive are the ones willing to work when nobody is watching. By the time she stepped onto the University of Missouri campus as a freshman, it was obvious that Cunningham was different. She played with the confidence of someone who had been preparing for that moment her entire life. No hesitation. No fear. No waiting for permission. Just basketball. 4 seasons at Missouri were enough for Cunningham to establish herself as one of the greatest players in program history. But what separated her was not just the statistics. It was the way she played. Every possession carried the same intensity. Every game looked personal. Every opponent knew they were going to be challenged physically and mentally. Coaches dream about players with that kind of mentality. Relentless energy. Physical toughness. And a competitive fire that does not change whether it is a regular season practice or the biggest game of the year. That identity followed her into the professional level. Then came the moment she had worked toward her entire life. The 2019 WNBA draft. The Phoenix Mercury stepped forward and called her name. The dream became reality. But for Sophie Cunningham, that was never the finish line. It was the beginning of a new battle.
Draft tonight, Sophie Cunningham here, all-time leading scorer in Missouri history. How are you? You're getting drafted tonight, pretty wild time in your life.
But making it to the league is one thing. Surviving in it is a completely different battle. Nobody sees that part. The early mornings. The endless workouts. The moments where a player has to keep believing even when nobody outside the locker room is paying attention. That journey is not as glamorous as arriving as an instant superstar. There are no headlines for the daily grind. No cameras following the player who is fighting just to earn respect. And that was always Sophie Cunningham's path. She built everything. One possession at a time. One defensive stop at a time. One difficult moment at a time. She became the type of player coaches trusted when games got physical and pressure started rising. The type of teammate who could change the energy of a locker room. The type of competitor who would fight for every loose ball, every rebound, every opportunity. She was not always the player on the biggest advertisements. She was not always the name dominating national conversations. But inside the Phoenix Mercury locker room and throughout the WNBA, Cunningham's reputation was powerful. Players respected her. Coaches trusted her. Teammates knew exactly what she brought every night. Toughness, passion, leadership. And that is why her emotions carry a different meaning. Because Sophie Cunningham is not someone who shows vulnerability for attention. When she says something matters, people listen. When she gets emotional, people understand that there is a real reason behind it. Then came 2024. A draft night that changed the entire landscape of women's basketball. The league waited as the Indiana Fever stepped onto the clock. And with the first overall pick, they selected Caitlin Clark. A generational talent. A player who had already changed the conversation around women's basketball before playing a single professional game. And suddenly, Sophie Cunningham found herself sharing the court with the player everyone was watching.
The first pick in the 2024 WNBA draft, the Indiana Fever select
Caitlin Clark became the biggest name women's college basketball had ever seen. But Sophie Cunningham was not part of that journey. Clark was heading to Indiana. Cunningham remained in Phoenix. Different teams. Different cities. Different stages of their careers. But basketball has a way of bringing people together. The paths that look completely separate eventually cross. Games. Practices. All-star events. Shared moments around the league. And somewhere along the way, Cunningham got close enough to see something that changed the way she viewed Clark. Because there is a difference between watching a player from across the court and actually being around them. A difference between seeing the highlights and seeing the person. A veteran player who had already fought through years of professional basketball suddenly found herself beside Clark. Not trying to stop her. Not competing against her. But experiencing what it was like to share the same space with her. And that is where the story becomes interesting. Because the Caitlin Clark most people know is the version they see on television. The impossible three-pointers. The shots from the logo. The passes that seem to appear before anyone else sees the opening. The moments that make crowds stand up before the ball even reaches the rim. But according to Cunningham, there was something else. Something beyond the highlights. Something that only teammates and people around the game get to see. The preparation. The personality. The way she impacts the people around her. And for someone like Sophie Cunningham, someone who has spent years around elite competitors, that difference mattered. Because superstars are not just measured by what they do when the lights are on. They are measured by how they make everyone around them better. And that was the part of Caitlin Clark that truly surprised her.
From the logo! She gets it out of that left hand, and it's money.
Here's something interesting. When Caitlin Clark made the jump to the professional level, Sophie Cunningham was not standing on the other side of the story. Clark went to Indiana. Cunningham stayed in Phoenix. Two different teams. Two different cities. Two completely different basketball journeys. But basketball has a strange way of connecting people. Seasons overlap. Games bring players together. Paths that seem separate eventually cross. And somewhere along the way, Cunningham got close enough to see Clark's game from a completely different perspective. Not as an opponent. Not as someone watching highlights. But as another professional who understood exactly how difficult it is to reach the highest level. So what happens when a battle-tested competitor, someone who has fought through years of professional basketball, suddenly finds herself sharing the floor with a player operating at a different level? That is where the story becomes fascinating. Because everyone knows the public version of Caitlin Clark. The impossible deep threes. The shots from the logo that defenders can only hope to contest. The no-look passes that arrive before teammates even realize they are open. The scoring records. The sold-out arenas. The way she transformed a basketball career into a worldwide conversation. But teammates see a different version of Clark. And honestly, that version may be even more impressive. Because the biggest difference is not just what she does during games. It is what happens before them. Teammates describe a player who arrives early. A player who stays late. Someone who approaches practice with the same intensity as a playoff game. Every drill matters. Every possession matters. Every detail matters. Think about the challenge of guarding Caitlin Clark every day. Not just once during the season. Not just for 40 minutes under the lights. Every single practice. Being the defender she studies. The player she reads. The person trying to stop the next shot, the next pass, the next decision. Mercury players experienced pieces of that challenge during regular season matchups. But being around that level of preparation consistently is something completely different. Then there is the passing. That is the skill people around Clark mention repeatedly. She sees things before they develop. She notices a defender leaning slightly too far. She recognizes a teammate beginning a cut before the opening is obvious. She understands timing at a level where the ball arrives exactly when it needs to. Sometimes the receiver does not even realize they are open until the pass is already there. Clark saw it first. Then there is the pressure factor. And maybe that is what separates her the most. A lot of talented players become less comfortable when the moment gets bigger. Pressure speeds the game up. Decisions become harder. Mistakes become easier to make. Clark seems to experience the opposite. The bigger the moment, the clearer everything becomes. The louder the arena gets, the calmer she appears. That is a rare quality. The kind of quality that defines special players. And it is not only during games. People around Clark talk about the small moments. The way she approaches warm-ups. The seriousness she brings to film study. The questions she asks before others even recognize there is a problem. Remembering a defensive tendency from several games earlier. Recognizing a pattern instantly. Making adjustments in real time. It can look like instinct. But behind that instinct is preparation. Thousands of repetitions. Thousands of decisions. Thousands of hours spent understanding the game. For Caitlin Clark, greatness is not something she turns on when the lights come on. It is simply her standard. Her everyday level. And when someone like Sophie Cunningham, a player whose entire career has been built on toughness and competitiveness, sees that up close, it carries a different weight. Then comes one of those moments. The kind that separates great players from unforgettable ones. The defense is doing everything correctly. The clock is shrinking. The pressure is at its highest. And somehow, Clark finds something nobody else in the building sees. Maybe it is a pass delivered with perfect timing, landing exactly where a teammate needs it before the defense can react. Maybe it is a shot from a distance that most players would never even consider attempting. A shot that looks impossible. Until it goes in. That is the moment Cunningham remembers. Not the highlight package. Not the replay from 10 different camera angles. The real moment. The human moment. Those 2 or 3 seconds where everyone watching realizes they just saw something different. She tried explaining it to her family. The same people who watched her grow up in Missouri gyms. The people who knew her before the professional basketball world knew her. The people who never needed her to prove anything. And still, she struggled to find the right words. Because that is what happens when you witness something extraordinary.